Well, welcome everybody. Really pleased to see a good turnout. Charles here has come to talk to us about how Shintaido has played a vital part of his life in promoting well-being. Now, the funding for this came from Rethink and the suicide prevention program. But this is like life enhancement and making the most of life. We will be hosting other talks, 3 or 4 more, and some of those may address more difficult issues, but we thought we'd kick off with a proper, healthy well-being, how to be autistic and have a great life.
Wow, thank you very much.
Shall I clap him?
Very enthusiastic audience member. Thank you very much for coming, everybody. I'm very pleased to see so many people here. As some of you may know, I was diagnosed with autism in the year 2000, and for me that was a very important life-changing moment. Until then, I really didn't understand what it was that made me different. Now, when I was diagnosed, and the people that I spoke to about this diagnosis really fell into 2 camps. People who knew me professionally or had known me just in my adult life all said the same thing. They all said, "You, really? You can't be autistic, but you look natural, you speak well. How can that be possible?" My family, on the other hand, people who'd known me ever since I was a child, they all said something different. They all said, "Oh, well, there's no surprise there then, is there? That's how you are." Now, the reason I sought a diagnosis for autism, and in those days my diagnosis was actually with a condition called Asperger syndrome, which is a term that you don't hear so often these days, but 20 years ago that term was very current. And it happened because my son, Nicholas, had been diagnosed with as a child with the same condition. And it was very clear to me, as soon as the diagnosis was confirmed, comparing the problems he was having in primary school at the time, that if he had this condition, so did I. And therefore I went to my GP, who referred me to a specialist in autism. The specialist in autism asked me a lot of questions and also spoke to both my parents, who were still with us at that time, and asked them about how I had been as a child, how I had developed growing up, and all those kind of things. And she gave a diagnosis which said it's a very clear case of undiagnosed Asperger syndrome. And the reason this moment was important to me is because it really made me consider what it was that made the response from my friends on the one hand and from my family on the other hand so different. Why were these 2 groups of people reacting in such opposite ways? And it seemed to indicate to me that something had happened between my childhood and as I grew up and as I developed, which had caused my presentation of autism to change over time. Now, during the diagnosis procedure, the specialist in autism who diagnosed me said something very interesting to me. She said that young people with autism benefit from 2 things. They benefit from very intensive artistic therapy, and they also benefit from very intensive physical therapy, that is, doing physical exercise of some sort. And I had described to her my life around the time of my early 20s, when I was at art college studying art, and so, which was ideal, she felt, for me. And whilst I was at art college, I discovered this very strange and unique movement system, which I had never heard of, and which none of my friends had ever heard of, called Shintaido. And the specialist in autism, she felt that I had somehow inadvertently placed myself in what was really an ideal environment for myself at that time in my life. I was studying art, which gave me a kind of very intensive artistic therapy, and I was studying Shintaido, which also gave me a very intensive physical therapy. Now, I felt there was a little bit more to it than that, but I didn't quite know how to vocalize it at the time. But what really became clear to me was that Shintaido had been very important to me when I was younger, and potentially was still important to me as I went on through life. And so at the time of my diagnosis, I must admit I had rather let Shintaido slide to one side. I had finished my art college degree, I had got married, I'd had 2 children, one of whom had been diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome, and life was quite busy. So Shintaido was something I only had so much time for. I kept in touch with old Shintaido friends, but wasn't doing so much of it. But after this diagnosis, it really became clear to me that Shintaido was something I should devote more time and attention to. So I threw myself back into my Shintaido practice. A couple of years later, I qualified as a Shintaido instructor. And that was something that was quite an intensive process. It involves not just doing a lot of Shintaido, doing a lot of exercise, but then having the courage to go in front of a group of Shintaido instructors and do an exam to show that you can do Shintaido. Since then, I started teaching Shintaido, and and today, to my complete amazement, I'm something called a Dai Shihan, and in the Shintaido world, that means a kind of very senior level instructor. So I am one of a small group of international instructors that meets every so often, and I find myself part of something called the International Technical and Exam Committee, which is a hell of a mouthful, but what it means is that I am now running those same exams which I took to become an instructor some 20 years ago. And for me, that feels like I've arrived somewhere, and it's a very strange place when I look back at how I was as a young man. So, you're probably asking the question, what on earth is Shintaido, and why do I feel it's so important? Not only for my own well-being, but also, I feel by implication, important for the well-being of others, those on the autistic spectrum, but also those who are neurotypical, in fact, almost anybody. Well, Shintaido is a movement system based on traditional Japanese martial arts. The martial arts in question particularly are karate movement, which involves these kind of punching movements and striking movements and blocking movements, and also involves a lot of sword movement. That's using how to use a sword and how to make the movements graceful and clear. But there's one very important difference. Shintaido itself, unlike most martial arts, is not concerned so much with self-defense. When you think about martial arts, you tend to think of learning a kind of fighting system which will allow you to defend yourself should you ever be attacked. Now, Shintaido will do that, but that's like a byproduct. That's not really what people who study Shintaido are interested in. What people who study Shintaido are mostly interested in is how to become better versions of themselves. It's about self-improvement rather than about self-defense. And that's a very important distinction to make because it affects the whole of the Shintaido curriculum. So when we partner with somebody else to do a particular exercise, it's not so much about defeating an opponent as about helping a partner to perform a better movement. And those kind of things run throughout the Shintaido curriculum. In Shintaido, we have 3 very basic movements. These are movements that we call the pillars of Shintaido. Those of you in the audience who have studied Shintaido with me will be familiar with these terms, but I'm going to explain for them for the rest of you. The first of these is a series of movements, or a kata, which we call Tenshin Goso. Tenshin Goso literally means the 5 movements. It consists of 5 basic movements. The proper translation of Tenshin Goso means the 5 movements of heavenly truth, which gives you an idea of the kind of aspiration towards which Shintaido is aiming. And it consists of a series of movements based on karate movements, which almost offer a kind of complete curriculum. So Tenshin Goso is about the technique we use in Shintaido. The second of these 3 pillars that we call them, is called Eiko. Eiko is a very simple movement. It involves reaching up very high and then either running or stepping in one direction and bringing your arms down from a very tall position, which we call tenso, down towards a horizon movement. And the aim of this exercise is not so much a technique, it's about opening yourself up as a person. It's about really letting loose all your feelings. So we often accompany this Eiko movement with a very loud sound. We do a lot of sound work in Shintaido. So almost this kind of feeling. Ah, very loud. And those of you who've been to my classes, and whenever I ask you to make these kind of sounds, you all go, oh my God, that feels so scary. I can't possibly do that. But using sound, using voice, has a very strange effect. It opens up something inside the person. It makes them more outgoing, makes them more responsive, and makes them also more sensitive to things that are happening around them. You feel less walled off, less surrounded by your own walls that keep you inside, whatever it is that's keeping you inside. That's why using voice and using these quite extreme movements can be very uplifting and sets people free and allows them to feel their own well-being in a way perhaps they didn't before. The third of these pillars is something called hikari. Now, hikari literally means playing with light, and it is about playing, but most of all, it's about playing with a partner. So it's about communication. And this was the movement that most fascinated me about Shintaido, especially after my diagnosis of autism, because I realized that what's contained within Shintaido is not just about technique, but it's about communication. Very specifically, it's about the kind of non-verbal communication which most people on the autistic spectrum, wherever they are on that spectrum, have a lot of problems with. People with autism typically have problems reading the body language of other people. They typically have problems filling in the gaps between what people are saying to them and what perhaps they might actually mean. And Shintaido, because it involves a lot of partner work, whenever you're stood in front of a partner, the first thing you have to do is predict what they're going to do next, is feel their timing, is feel how they're going to move, and essentially trying to predict that so that you can make a corresponding movement with your own body. And I realized very early on that these kind of communication exercises are absolutely key, both to my own enjoyment of Shintaido, but why Shintaido has helped me so much to communicate better than I could as a young man. And that, for me, is the really the key to why I am so passionate about being a Shintaido instructor and bringing Shintaido to other people, because it has helped me so much in those areas. Now, Shintaido is a broad curriculum. Apart from those three pillars of Shintaido, which kind of affect the whole of the Shintaido curriculum, Shintaido can be roughly divided into three parts. Now, the first of those parts is what we call freehand Shintaido. That's performing Shintaido just as you are, just with your body, with your hands, with your mouth, with your voice. And freehand Shintaido looks a little bit like karate, but there's a lot more running around and shouting involved. The other style of Shintaido is using a long staff. I don't know if you've ever watched Robin Hood films, but you'll be familiar if you have with something called a quarterstaff. In Japanese, it's called a bow staff. And for me, it was my first and almost my favorite part of Shintaido. I love playing in a field with a very long staff and making big movements. And the bow curriculum in Shintaido is quite complex, actually. There's a lot of kata, there's a lot of sequences of movement. There's a lot for an autistic person to get obsessed about, really looking at all the details, which is what I do. The third style we practice is with a sword, and Rose admonished me earlier on for not bringing my sword with me, because she thought you might all like to see it, but I didn't. So you just have to imagine that you can do Shintaido with a sword, either with what we call a bokken, which is like a wooden toy sword, or with an actual sword, which of course you have to be very careful because there are very obvious safety implications involved. However, today, I suppose I have to think about what I'm trying to achieve as a Shintaido instructor. One of the reasons that I was so happy to be in touch with the Autism Hounslow group is because I felt it gave me an opportunity to speak about and to demonstrate Shintaido to other people on the autistic spectrum. And I've learnt over the years, through many encounters with people on the autistic spectrum, that Shintaido is not something that comes naturally to people, and that people on the autistic spectrum can be, and how can I put this nicely, they can be a little bit resistant to change. Sometimes people on the autistic spectrum are a little bit wary of trying out something new. And of course, what I'm asking them to do is exactly that, is to try out something new. But for me, the big message of Shintaido is that it's about personal change. It's about becoming a better version of yourself. And I feel Shintaido has helped me do that, and I very much feel it can help other people to do that too. Becoming a better version of yourself is not something that's limited to the neurotypical population. It is something anybody can do, wherever they are on the spectrum. It's always a question of finding out what your own limitations are, finding out what it is that's hampering your own sense of self-worth or self-empowerment, and figuring out what it is that you can do to change that. And Shintaido is a really good tool for that kind of self-development. So I think what I would like to do at this stage in the talk is just introduce you all to a little bit of Shintaido. And I do mean a little bit, just maybe 3 or 4 minutes. Is that something that you all feel you can manage?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, John.
Yes.
Good.
Charles.
Thank you very much. Some of you who've tried it before will enjoy this. So Shintaido, we call it a keiko. A practice session in Shintaido is called keiko. And it's divided into a few very simple parts. The first part is a series of warm-up exercises. As any of you who have done physical exercise will know, the most important thing before you do any kind of strenuous exercise is to first warm up the body. And we do this with a series of very simple exercises which warms the body from the head down to the toes. Next, we do a very short meditation. And the meditation is designed to bring the group of people together so that they can then perform Shintaido. After that, we do the actual keiko, which is we do a series of Shintaido exercises, and we finish the class with another very short meditation. And the format is always the same. It doesn't matter if you're studying for 5 minutes or for 5 hours. Those stages exist together. So I'm going to ask you all to stand on your feet, if those of you who can manage to do that. And we're going to start the class with a series of very simple warm-up exercises. So please make sure you can get somewhere where you can see me. And I'm going to ask you very simply to put your hands out to the side, a little bit to the side, and just move your body from side to side like this. So the hands are moving around behind you. And if you're sitting down, this is an exercise you can do whether you're on your feet or sitting down. And the next one, and I'm going to count for this one, we're going to rotate the shoulders backwards like this. And those of you who know the counting can join in. Ich, ni, san, shi, do, rok, shich, hach, ku, ju, Okay, very nice. The next one, we're going to make our hands very loose and very soft like this, as if they're gone completely floppy. And please try to do this without actually hitting your neighbour. I'm going to ask you to throw these loose hands up into the air in one direction and the other. Yi, ni, san, shi, go, rok, shi, hach, ku, ju. Very nice. And next, we're going to put our hands behind our hips like this, placed just in the lower back. And I want you to push your hips forward and then push them back to loosen up the lower back. Ich, ni, san, shi, go. And now the same movement but sideways. Ich, ni, san, shi, go. And now we're going to push those hips around in a complete circle. First to one side, back, other side, and out to the front. Ich, ni, san, and other direction. Ich, ni, san. Okay, now the last warm-up we're going to do, this one is really hard. I'm going to ask you to imagine you're picking up your foot with your hand. So imagine you've got a string that picks up your foot like this. And I want you to, with your hand, I want you to turn your foot and your hand together. This one is quite tricky. Ich, ni, san. And other way around. Ich, ni, san. And now we're going to try that with the other foot. Lift your foot off the ground. Oh, you're all doing really well. Ich, ni, san. And other way. Ich, ni, san. Okay, very nice. Now, at the end of the warm-up, as I said, we do a short meditation. So I want you to all to stand with your hands very loosely at your side. And on the command, Mokso, I want you to close your eyes and imagine your body descending very deep down into the ground. So closing your eyes, Mokso. Mokso Yame. Yame means stop. So stop meditating. You can open your eyes now. Very nice. And then we do a bow. The bowing is leg like this. So that's the first two parts of a Shintaido Keiko. Now we're going to do some actual Shintaido. Thank you very much. So, I'm going to ask my esteemed colleague Sulav, who's a veteran of Shintaido, to join me here. Is that okay? So in a minute I'm going to ask you to find a partner. But I'm going to do one of those communication exercises I talked about earlier on. Essentially, I'm going to make my hand into like a cup shape like this, and I'm going to ask Sulav to do the same. So you make your hand like this, okay. And I'm going to put our hands together. It's okay, I'm just going to take your hands together, and I'm going to put the hands like this, so that the two hands are connected. And now we're just going to pull very slightly back, so there's a slight tension between our arms. And all I'm going to do now is I'm going to pull Sulav slightly towards me, so he moves, and then he's going to pull me towards him, so that I move like this. And then we're just going to find a rhythm between
Charles,
us.
you're too strong, man.
Yeah, it's not about strength. This is about just finding a rhythm and a level of communication between us like this. And we're just going to do that for 30 seconds or so. Okay, thank you very much, Sue.
Thank you.
Very nice. So I'm going to ask you all to find a partner, someone next to you, and hands in this kind of position, so the two hands can link together.
I'll take this to
So
someone.
go and find
Do you have to
someone
do
else to
Charles?
partner with.
Pull each other.
Yes, exactly that, yes. So put link your hands together. Link your hands together. Very nice. And just for 30 seconds, pulling backwards and forwards. Try to find a sense of